Welcome to an episode of Palmer Village's Palmer Voices, a Palmer, Massachusetts personal story project to help preserve the past of its villages and residents. Brought to you by the Palmer Public Library, Impact TV, and other local organizations. Funded in part by a grant from the Palmer Cultural Council, a local agency which is supported by the Mass Cultural Council, a state agency. The goal of this project is to collect digital artifacts and diverse personal accounts of life and experiences from each generation in the villages of Palmer. Stories of ordinary people are extraordinary. The history, the stories, and the artifacts from each village over the decades are what make Palmer unique.
Virginia Masnicki has led a public-spirited, industrious, purposeful life. She's a dynamic woman who gets things done. Born in Three Rivers, Massachusetts, Virginia was surrounded by a close-knit family that included an elder brother and a younger sister. Virginia attended St. Peter and Paul Parochial School, then Palmer High School, graduating in 1957. Starting at a young age, she always chose to get involved, whether it be participating in a school play, presenting at graduation, or organizing school and community fundraising activities. Virginia never hesitated to take a leadership role. I am Lisa Gagne with Palmer Village's Palmer Voices. Today is August 11th, 2022, and Virginia Masnicki is here with me. She has brought along several documents, pictures, and artifacts to share with us. These items represent some of the many milestones and events in her life and in the towns of Three Rivers and Palmer. Virginia, please introduce yourself.
My name is Virginia Masnicki, and at present I live in Palmer, but I grew up in Three Rivers.
So tell me about your childhood years, Virginia, on Bourne Street.
I grew up in a three-tenement home. The Tenser property had about 20 acres, and it was almost in central Three Rivers off the main street, but it abutted two cemeteries. And we had a lot of freedom as far as winter sports, lawn sports, and a lot of the children from the side streets, from Main Street, would just congregate at the Tenser property, especially in the winter. We had hills, and so sledding or skiing. There were 3 ponds, and that provided skating. The older kids, they would just come and kind of protect us and take care of us if we got hurt. And it was a great feeling that we were like 8, 9, and 10 to have older people around us. And they would have a bonfire and roast marshmallows. We had a barn on site, and we would have barn plays. And my sister and brother and cousins would partake in the plays, and we would make the costumes from crepe paper. And we got that training at St. Peter and Paul School because a lot of the costumes were made from crepe paper. And so we would invite our relatives, of course, and neighbors, and perform for them and charge them 10 cents for the fee. And they enjoyed it. It was a pleasant experience for all. And it was just a very safe environment with a lot of mutual respect.
How about your school, St. Peter and Paul?
St. Peter and Paul School was a very enjoyable experience for the reason that we had a lot of subjects, in fact, 13 on the report card. But it gave us a wonderful education. And in first grade, I was left-handed, but they immediately changed me to right-handed. And that happened in that era. I was only 5 years old, and I learned my second language, which was Polish, and remained using that language right through the 8 years that I was there. And so I learned my religion in Polish. So this gave you a purpose now to retain the language because it was used every day.
That was Catholic, right?
Yes.
And you got involved with the traditional Polish costumes and in
yes.
the plays and
There
things?
were plays, And specifically, the Christmas Eve is known as Wigilia, where they have all the Polish foods, and they exchange wishes with a opłatek, which is a form-made wafer.
And you read a graduation speech
Yes,
when you
I
graduated? Would you like to read that for us now?
Sure. Wielebny księże proboszczu, wielebny księże asystencie, wielebni księża I szanowni goście. I was, najdrożsi rodzice I szanowni goście, z radością witamy. Oceniamy waszą przychylność, przy tym starać się będziemy, aby uprzyjemnić wam chwile, które z nas spędzicie. W tej błogiej nadziei w imieniu grona abiturientów powtórnie witamy, wdzięcznie wołając, witajcie nam.
That's daunting for how old were you?
13.
Wow. Tell me a little about where you grew up.
I had an aunt who owned a confectionery store, and in that era, ice cream was not commercially packed, so you had to hand pack it yourself. And they would use a spade, and they had 5-gallon containers of ice cream. So you would have to diligently now do it like in layers and really pack it down. And that was kind of a tedious task to do. And she had a soda fountain in there, and so I learned how to make all the sundaes and milkshakes. And the store had toys and magazines and greeting cards, tobacco. I remember the package of cigarettes cost 17 cents in 1955. She even sold ammunition for the hunters. And that was quite an experience because they needed to present an ID. In that era, you had to count out the change to the customer. It's not like it is today. We had a lot of stores on the main street, and my father was in the grocery business, and he and his brother formed a partnership in 1955. We had the post office, restaurants. It was a very busy business section. I like to refer to Three Rivers as probably a mini town because of all these businesses. There even a lumber company, and those are just a few. A lot of private owned mom and pop stores and a drugstore. So you really didn't have to leave. There were a lot of sidewalks on both sides of each street. And in that era, not all people owned a car. So you could walk to all of these stores.
Tell us about the flood of 55.
The flood of 55, as a 15-year-old, that was kind of a sad thing to see. As I mentioned, my father was in partnership with his brother. They just went in partnership in March, and the flood was in August. It affected the entire business section of Three Rivers. So what he had to do was any inventory that was salvaged, it would be transferred to the Tenser property because there was a barn there. And family members would disinfect and clean the cans, and then they would be inspected by the Federal Drug Administration. They would store them in the barn, and people would come and they would buy them. And it was 10 cents a can. They had to take a government loan to remain in business, and that was with a lower percentage.
And that business was called the Tensar Superette.
Superette, yes.
Mm-hmm. So the cleanup must have taken quite a while.
Definitely.
Now, you were still living in Three Rivers when you were a teenager, right?
Yes.
And what did you do for fun?
I know the town hall was there, and
roller skating at the town hall?
Yes, two classmates from St. Peter and Paul and I went there, and we had the whole place to ourselves because that was mainly used for town hall meetings. And there was a basketball court there, so we tried to get there before anybody was using those, but it was kind of a cool experience. Basically, all my entertainment was on the Tenser property, but Crystal Park was in Bondsville. I would roller skate again and got my first pair of shoe skates. And there was swimming there. I chose to roller skate at Crystal Park because they even had an organist who played the music. And that was very entertainment and really rare.
Forest Lake is where you had the top polka bands, right?
Yes, yes. They had a lot of polka bands, and people would come from so many different towns. I mean, as far as Westfield, from Connecticut, and the bands were three were from Connecticut, and the rest were local ones, like from Holyoke, Larry Chesky from Holyoke, and there were local bands in Three Rivers too, the Zawinski brothers and the Brodzic brothers, and Happy Louie would play at Pulaski Park because that was known as the New England capital of polka.
You had some movie theaters then for
The
teenage
movie theaters
entertainment?
were in Palmer. There was a Five Star on Main Street and the Strand on Central Street.
Mhm.
And I saw Rebel Without a Cause at the Strand,
Mhm.
and that theater closed. I don't remember the year, but I think that's was the Five Star was the first theater and the Strand was the second. So by, I would say, the 1970s, I think both were closed.
How about bowling?
Bowling, it was known as the Palmer Bowl, owned by the Madura family.
I heard you were pretty good at it.
Well, I was an elite when I worked at the Palmer National Bank,
Mhm.
so I have a trophy for that. And you got to meet your employees on a more relaxed basis when you were playing. Otherwise, at work, you didn't have time to really visit.
Tell us a story about your first pizza.
This was at the Villanova on Central Street, which is a tailgate tavern today. And usually people in my era, they would get the frozen ones. And this was, real handmade crust. And I can still taste it today. The crust
That's
was
a big
just
deal.
so soft. And there was a jukebox there. So I remember the Yellow Rose of Texas was playing when I was eating it.
That's a vivid memory.
Well, I can almost taste it today.
And you had a Woolworths back then?
Yes, and they had a lunch counter also. And it was like a Kmart store with the same inventory and variety of goods. But it also was a place for employment for high school kids after school.
I was looking at the menu. Banana splits were 39 cents.
Yes,
Not
I would
different
make
now.
those at my aunt's store also. So I
Okay.
got that training there for that.
Now, did they sell the Casella Springs and the Kist soda there?
Casella Springs was in Three Rivers on Springfield Street, and Kiss Beverage was in Thorndike.
Now, you went to Palmer High,
Yes.
and what did you study there?
I studied the commercial course because I really wanted to be a secretary, and I needed the training. And it was an intense course because I can remember the subjects were typing, bookkeeping, accounting, stenography, transcription, and it had to be done to perfection. Typing one was 60 words a minute without error. Typing 2, 80 words a minute without error. And then the transcription had to be close to perfect. And if it wasn't, especially the punctuation, they would take 5 points off for every error. It really trained you to be as proficient as you could. It was a wonderful education. And I was able to continue Polish 1 and 2 as a freshman and sophomore. So basically I had 10 years of Polish. And that really came in handy later in my life because our son was in Prague, Czechoslovakia, and we went to Poland and visited him on a tour. And I remember September 30th, 1993, it was freezing temperatures, and we walked from the hotel to the marketplace, and everybody was frozen because we weren't prepared for that weather. So I used my Polish language at a restaurant, and I told the host that we were frozen. And so he took us into this large room with a round table, and he served us mulled Bulgarian wine. It was a beautiful color of purple. I'll never forget that. And we were like the 12 apostles around the table. There were 12 of us. And I had a lot of friends after that. And then I did help the tour guide out, with certain words in Polish when he couldn't explain it. So
Oh.
it was very valuable. I didn't think that I could even remember that.
Hmm.
This was 1993. And then when we were in Krakow, we had an optional afternoon. So we hired a taxi driver to take us to my paternal grandparents' home place, which was Tarnów. And that was 1.5 hours one way and 1.5 hours back. And I conversed with the driver for 3 hours. And the only thing I found myself doing was Americanizing the sentence, because in Polish, the predicate is first and the subject second,
Oh.
and it's a one word.
Mhm.
So this is what I found. When I said to him, "Do you understand what I'm saying?" And he says, "Sure." And I said, "Well, what kind of a car are we riding in?" He said, "Mercedes." And I says, "Gee, I never learned that word." And then finally he said, "Mercedes." The language was very valuable for me later in life.
How about your Washington trip?
The Washington trip, we had fundraisers for that. And one of them was the paper drives throughout all the villages. We would meet in a truck with the driver and just go from house to house, and then go to Diamond, National, and Thorndike. And they would recycle the newspapers into egg cartons. That was their product. The other fundraisers were school plays, and I designed the cover for the Meet Me at the Prom school play. If we had dances, there were fees for that. And our junior prom, we had, I was surprised that in the booklet, my name was as business manager, and I didn't even realize that that was my title. Louis Dussault, who it was a very popular polka band, he did not have his polka band at that time. He just had Louis Dussault and orchestra, and it was the 50s music. And that was held in the school auditorium. We had committees, and we would even make decorations, and it was just camaraderie between classmates. The Washington trip was a 6-day trip. We left on the train from Springfield and went to New York and spent a night there. We went to Radio City Music Hall to see the Rockettes in an Easter pageant.
Oh, fun.
We had a ferry ride across the Hudson River, and we saw the Statue of Liberty and the Manhattan skyline. And then we boarded the train to Baltimore. It was the B&O train, and we traveled through New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland, and saw the Naval Academy, and then went to Washington, D.C. And we saw all the government buildings, Mount Vernon, the White House, the Capitol, the Arlington Memorial Cemetery, and saw the changing of the guards. And then the other highlight was the Smithsonian and the Supreme Court, and the Congressional Library, where there were archives. In the archives building, there was the display of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. And then we saw the Lincoln and Jefferson memorials. I have a picture of my classmates in front of the Washington Monument, and that is an outstanding memory for me. And then we went on the Old Bay Line. It was a steamer that was an inland trip, and so you saw historic places like Jamestown, Yorktown, Williamsburg, and you had staterooms, two to a room. I think I was 17. I never thought I would have an experience like that. But Palmer High School had an annual trip for years, and we really were very fortunate to be able to be a part of it.
How long was the trip?
6 days.
Now, you moved from Three Rivers to Palmer.
Yes,
You said in your mid-20s, I believe.
I was 25.
Tell me about that. You said it was a very patriotic environment?
I think the most outstanding thing to me about Palmer is it has a patriotic spirit. And part of that is the numerous parades that I partook in, because I was in the elementary school band and then the high school band, and it was a marching band. So you had exposure to marching in the parade.
What instrument did you
I
play?
played the clarinet. Going back to the parades, though, in Three Rivers, I remember there was a July 4th parade, and my mother decorated my bicycle, and I had a decorated outfit. And so I rode that bicycle all the way from Hernevitz Park, which is the furthest end of Three Rivers, to to St. Anne Cemetery. There would be a stop there, for the military salute and so forth. And then it disbanded, for that group of children. But in the high school era, we would start at Hernevitz Park, and the parade would start in Three Rivers and go to St. Anne Cemetery again. And then we would get on a bus and go to Bondsville to the Veterans Memorial there. And a group would go by bus to Thorndike to the Veterans Memorial, but the remainder of the band would go to Palmer, and we would have a parade from the high school down Thorndike Street, Main Street, Church Street, and back to Converse Street to the Veterans Memorial. So that's just ingrained in me, being a part of this. And I can recall in 2021, because of COVID, they did not have a Memorial Day parade in Palmer in 2020. And a group of people were interested in organizing one in 2021, even though COVID was still existing. And there had to be over 100 people there in attendance. And it was very pleasing to me, because our son lives in Florida, and he would always hear me talking about patriotism in Palmer, even though he grew up in Palmer. He was part of the school band. He played my clarinet, and but for him to witness this was, very important to me. So there were always parades, and they really treated the veterans with respect. They had the Purple Heart event also in 2021, shortly after the parade. So that spirit was still there.
You volunteered on several committees and things. You got involved with a lot of fundraising over the years.
I was asked to research the history of the Wing Memorial Hospital. And before that, I was involved in the Palmer Library. I was a administrative staff volunteer, and then an ESL tutor. And so I was introduced to all the resources for research. So that really came in handy, and I do have quite a collection of history of the town of Palmer. But when I decided to live in Palmer, it was because of the hospital. And we were living across from the turnpike, and I was working at the Palmer National Bank, and I just felt it was a safe community, and this is where I wanted to make my home. So between the hospital and the library, I call them two bookends of the town of Palmer, because the volunteerism is there for people if they have the time, and it's a very close community.
Now, you did some volunteering as an ESL tutor and as a librarian.
Yes, I had a 19-year-old Polish immigrant. She just was in this country for about a year, and we met at the library because they had in the lower part of the library, that was the Literacy Volunteers of America. And so she was a very zealous person. She worked 12-hour days. And the commitment was 2 hours a week for 50 weeks. And she had difficulty maintaining that 2-hour commitment. So I had a tailor-made program for her where we would probably be together for 6 hours a day and take field trips and sort of have a lesson along the way. And then we'd go to a restaurant and she would have the opportunity to order her meal. And she really liked shopping. We took her to Stratton Mountain and she was very appreciative of it. She was a bright girl. And so we were together for 7 years. After that, she got married and then had a family. So she could not dedicate that time to have more instruction. The goal at that time was for her to become a U.S. citizen, but we were not familiar with the process.
Oh, okay.
And so it was 5 years before you could get a green card, and then another 5 years for the study for the citizenship. But I did speak at the Literacy Volunteers, or Top Floor Learning today, that's what it's known as, last year. And so I was approached by the director, and she wanted to know if I would be interested in bringing my student. And so I had asked her, but she had a family and some commitment, and she couldn't make it that evening. But before I spoke, we met, and she told me that she got her citizenship. And I just, was in awe that she had done this, because that was her dream. And then she told me that even her husband got it. So I just felt that, my effort and time with her really came to fruition.
Sounded like you had a big influence on her life.
Well, I think it was mutual.
And something you were talking a lot about was the Palmer National Bank. That was an influence on your life as well.
Yes, and when I was doing the research for the Wing Memorial Hospital, they was the same directors of the bank were directors at the Wing Hospital. So when I was doing this, it's like it made me feel younger again, So I guess it gave me that enthusiasm to go through with all of this research. But I was approached by the president of the Palmer National Bank as a junior in high school, and he asked me if I was interested in summer employment. And at that time, I was still working for my aunt, because I was only like 16 as a junior. And so he said, well, if you're ever looking for a job, here's my business card. And so I didn't pay any attention to it, because I did have a job, and I was very naive at 16. So he called me after the end of school, and he says, I'd like you to come to the bank for an interview. And so I agreed. I got a tour of the bank. And so he said, if you're interested in it, we'd like to have you work here for the summer. So I started in the bookkeeping department. And then he said, after graduation, the job is yours. Well, I was at a crossroads in my life at that time, because I studied piano for 10 years. And I didn't know if I wanted to pursue my education in music or continue with business. So this kind of made my decision for me. And I call it fate, because I just was at that point where I couldn't make a decision. So he kind of made it for me. Then I became supervisor of the savings and safe deposit departments. And I really enjoyed that, because we would have monthly meetings, because the laws were changing. And so, you would be with the rest of the people from other banks. And we would travel anywhere from southern Connecticut to southern Vermont to these meetings. So that gave me exposure of different areas and meeting people. And so I worked there for 11 years. And it was a very positive experience. And I was lucky enough to be there when they did the renovation. And it was a major process. So they even had gifts, that were raffled off, and tours were given. And the other part of the Palmer National Bank experience was the Christmas parties. They were annual at the public house. And we even had professionally made programs by an artist from Brimfield. And all the menu was in there, and on the back was the list of all the employees. And we would have skits, or entertainment during that dinner. And the meals were very high class, like shrimp cocktail, prime rib, popovers, dessert. But the best dessert was they announced our bonus. We got an envelope with the amount of our bonus. So I really look forward to that every year, and it was a real good celebration, where you had to dress up with appropriate clothes and so forth. So that exposed me to another type of life, a finer type of life.
And you have a few different trinkets from the bank, don't you? That you brought with
Yes,
you?
I do.
Okay.
A jar opener and a like a book-shaped bank that had columns for sorting. And for the safe deposit box experience, the customers were given 2 keys, so we gave them a key holder for it.
You did some photography too, didn't you?
Yes, I took a course at Duval Photography for 35 millimeter photography, and it was with slides, not film. So that's like the raw version of photography. It's unedited, but it's close to real life. But this gave me a good foundation, and we took a field trip, and we had to then come back to class, and they would critique everybody's work.
Mhm.
And so from that, I formed a business in 1992 because we owned a condo in Stratton, Vermont. And if you would go to the stores, if you wanted to send a postcard or even a card, a greeting card, that was not available in that area. So I started doing a photo blank note card. And I would do the photo and then mount it on the front of the card. And that really took off because I had a beautiful shot of Stratton Mountain. And then in Manchester, Vermont, there's a place called the Jelly Mill. They approached me to see if I would photograph all the inns there. And then coming back to Palmer or in the area, I did college campuses, and they use these cards for fundraisers. And the schools where my children went to school, Babson was another one, and Assumption. And then locally, I did have a collection of them at Gale's News Store, and I have beautiful shots of this area here, especially fall scenes, like the Ware River, and which is around the Forest Lake area. And then there was a place called the Olson Farm, and also one in Thorndike, a windmill, which is still there. And I took this picture of the barn shortly after my class at Duval's, just to have the proper composition. And that was of Three Rivers.
You've done a lot of interesting, fun things in your life.
I have.
Yeah.
One other one, getting back to Three Rivers. I mean, I started there, and then I ended up going to the Lavalette Field Park, and I was introduced to tennis. And I was able to get to the level with instruction at private tennis club to play adult league tennis. And I was captain of teams, and we were lucky to be championship teams where we traveled for competition to different states. And that was a span of about 12 years. And I was very happy that the Palmer Recreation Department had this course because my husband owned the business and he had 12-hour days. And so I was basically, raising our children. When I was introduced to tennis, there were only like 2 courts in Palmer. So by the time we would go there, it would be dark. So I said to my husband one day, this is very disappointing because it's entertainment. He says, well, what would you like? Everybody had swimming pools. I said, no, I don't want a swimming pool. I want a tennis court. And I think it would be wonderful for the children. And it did work out that way for them because 2 of them played college level. And then I became a coach for Wilbraham and Munson Academy because that's where my children went from 8th grade through high school. And so, my skills came in handy. It was a volunteer position, and I really enjoyed that.
That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yes.
Well, this is really enjoyable. Thanks for sharing all this with us.
Well, I met you in that process, and that's what life is all about, meeting new people and expanding your horizons.
I agree. Thanks again.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
This has been another recording of Palmer Village's Palmer Voices, brought to you by the Palmer Public Library in collaboration with Palmer Cultural Council, Mass Cultural Council, Impact TV, Palmer Historical and Cultural Center, Palmer Historical Commission, and Elbow Plantation Historical Society. To become a part of tomorrow's History Today, contact the Palmer Public Library to share your Palmer story. If you know someone whose story should be preserved, we'd love to hear about it. For more information, visit our website at palmerlibrary.org/palmervoices.